Hi everyone. A woman was once given a diagnosis that she didn't have very much longer to live, and so she began to put her life in order, including making arrangements for her funeral. She called her pastor and was talking to him about the songs she wanted sung and the scriptures that she wanted used. And as the pastor was leaving, she said, "Wait, one more thing. I want to be buried with a fork in my hand." The pastor was puzzled and asked why, and the woman told him at every church social or potluck, someone would always come around and collect the dirty dishes. And if they said, "Keep your fork," then I knew that there was still some yummy dessert to come, a creamy piece of chocolate cake or deep dish apple pie. I knew the best part of the meal was yet to come. I want people who come to my funeral and see me in my coffin to know that I know the best is yet to come. I just want to start by reading today from Revelation 21, verses 9 and 10. That's where we're picking up today. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of seven last plagues came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And he carried me away in the spirit to a mountain great and high, and showed me the holy city of Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. John was told to go and see the bride of the Lamb, and he's carried away in the spirit. Now, we've had that phrase a few times in the book of Revelation, and you look them up in your study questions this week to see what had happened each of those times. Back in chapter 17, for example, John was carried away to the wilderness, a place of barrenness. Here, he's carried away to a high mountain. In Scripture, mountains are often associated with the idea of an encounter with God. For example, Moses on Mount Sinai and the three disciples with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, just to name a couple. In the time in chapter 17 where he is carried away in the spirit, he's shown a prostitute. Here he's shown the bride of Christ, dressed in clean white linen. In each passage, he's shown a city. In chapter 17, it was Babylon, and here it's the New Jerusalem. I was intrigued by the fact that the New Jerusalem comes down from heaven to the new earth. It's odd, but I always thought that heaven is the final dwelling place of believers, but it seems as if that's a little bit simplistic. It seems that the New Jerusalem is also a final place and where we dwell, and it comes down from heaven. It seems that there's going to be some coming and going freely between heaven, the New Jerusalem, and the new earth. This city is described. It shines with the glory of God. It's described as being like a jasper, clear as crystal. Now, if you Google jasper, and I did, you're going to get pictures of a reddish stone, almost, I don't know, not really like an agate because it's not translucent at all, but a red stone. Well, sometimes they show them as green. But one thing I read was that it might have been in the ancient world that the name jasper was used for something that was more like a crystallite or even a diamond. And so the description of it in this passage is that it is a clear stone like crystal. The New Jerusalem is described in terms of its security, so to speak. It has a great high wall around it. The wall has 12 gates, pointing in all directions, 3 to the north, south, east, and west, respectively, and it had 12 foundations. All 3 of these things speak of security, of safety, of a strong, well-founded city. It's a place of safety and protection for all those who dwell in it. There are names on the gates and on the foundations. On the gates are the names of the 12 tribes of Israel, and on the foundations, the names of the 12 apostles. I wonder how John felt seeing his name on one of the foundations of this city that came down from heaven. This city, this plan of redemption, is not just for Israel, nor is it just for the Gentiles. It's for everyone. There was one plan of God from the beginning of creation. He didn't change his direction partway through. He didn't have to create a new plan when Israel rejected their Messiah. There was always one cohesive plan that included all people. And God began this plan, and now with the descent of this city, he completes it. What he began to build, he finishes. In verse 15, the angel takes a gold measuring rod and measures the city. Measuring always speaks of ownership and protection, but it's also true that you don't measure something that is a fable or a mirage. You only measure what is real. This is a real city. It may not look exactly like it's portrayed here. It may not look like any city we have ever seen, but nonetheless, this is a real place and is being measured. The size of the city is staggering. It says it measures 12,000 stadia in length and the same in width and height. Now get this, that's 2,200 kilometers square. That is huge. Actually not square, cubed, because it's high as well. That is absolutely massive. There's some debate if this is a literal size, but one thing almost all scholars suggest is that this is meant to refer back to the most holy place. The most holy place, also called the Holy of Holies, was the innermost room of the temple or tabernacle. In it too was a perfect cube, the same length as width and height. And it was where the presence of God dwelt in all its awesome splendor and majesty. But it was a room that humans couldn't enter except the high priest, and he could only go in once a year and only with the blood of the atonement sacrifice. Here, this city is the most holy place. It is the perfectly proportioned space in which God will dwell with and among and in his people. Not in a temple built with human hands, but in a city he built, one living, breathing human stone at a time. We, fitted and joined together, are the most holy place where God will dwell forever. Verse 17 says that the walls of the city are 144 cubits thick. This is a repetition of the number 12, which we also saw back in the measuring of its length, width, and height. And 12 represents completion. It seems to represent the completion and perfection of what God has done. Verse 18 tells us what the walls are like. The walls are made of jasper, and the city is of pure gold, as pure as glass. The foundations, it says, are decorated with every kind of gemstone. Try and picture this. The city is full of light, and we're going to read that in a minute. And it's made of pure gold, but it's pure like glass, translucent. The walls are made of jasper, and we already read that those are as clear as crystal. I imagine the blinding light of the city just shining out through these walls. It will be a dazzling sight. The earthly city of Jerusalem today is made of a white stone called Jerusalem limestone. By city ordinance, all the buildings in the city are constructed of it. And the city shimmers on the top of the Judean hills. On bright days, it's almost impossible to look at it because the reflected light off all this white limestone is so dazzling. But that's nothing to what the New Jerusalem will be like. The thing is, we are the stones of this city. So we are the stones of gold, as pure as glass. It reminds me of Job 23:10, where Job says, "When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold." We will be purified, become pure gold with all sin and failure burned away. We will be as pure as glass. And through us, the living stones of this city, the glory of God will shine. So the land will be radiant with his glory. The light of the presence of God will no longer be confined in a room without windows where no one can go. We will be the windows through which his glory will shine brilliantly outward into the new heavens and the new earth. The gates of the city, it says, are made of pearls. 1 pearl per gate. Imagine a pearl so huge it can make a gate. Now, pearls are different from the other gems in the passage. A pearl is made by a living organism, an oyster, and it's the product of pain. A grain of sand or some other irritant gets into the oyster, something that would harm the organism, and the oyster forms layer after layer of pearl around this grain of sand. The repeated, hard, smooth layers create the beauty of the pearl. In the ancient world, pearls were one of the most costly of the jewels, and they are formed through pain. There's something really beautiful in that. The Gospels tell us that Jesus is the door. Here, the gates of the New Jerusalem are made of pearls, created by pain. His suffering is what made it possible for us to be a part of this city, that gave us a door into his presence. His pain, his death produces this beauty and splendor. And some of the best things that God does in our lives are the results of time of pain and struggle. Verse 22 says, there is no temple in this city. The Lord is its temple, and there is no need for the sun or the moon, for the glory of God is its light. Again, picture the radiant glory of God shining through this city, passing right through its translucent walls. I wonder if you were puzzled by verse 24, chapter 21, verse 24. The nations will walk by its light. The kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it. So who are these nations? Who are the kings who will bring their splendor to the city? Are there not just simply believers left at this point? I mean, we're in the eternal state. So who are these nations? Is everyone not part of the city? What's going on here? Verse 27 says, nothing impure will enter this city, nor anyone who is deceitful, but only those whose names are in the Lamb's book of life. So it's clear that there are no unbelievers here. Now we have to be a bit careful not to be too literal about some of this. God is trying to describe something for us for which we have no earthly reference point. So some of this might be figurative. It might be God using language and imagery that we can understand to try to portray for us in some way that which he is going to provide for us in the future. To me, the image of these nations brings to mind two things. First, this city is going to have people coming and going who have come from all languages and nations on earth. We will be given our immortal bodies, but I don't think we're going to lose our ethnic distinctiveness. We will not become homogeneous or samey. We will not all look Jewish. There will be distinctive attributes of our genetic ethnic background in how we look. And we'll all be there. Not that all people of all nations will be saved. This is not universalism, but that all nations and people groups will be represented there. God will do what he said and bring the world together in Christ. So it is a picture of the community created by the work of Christ in us. And then in verse 25, we're told that the gates of the city will never be shut. Gates are defensive in nature, but there isn't any need to close them. There's no danger against which to defend. There's no night, there's no time of risk, there are no enemies. There's nothing but peace and safety. The image seems to be of this open movement, people going in and out. We're all part of the city. The light shines out to all the earth. People come and go, bringing their praise to the King. There's unity between the city and the whole earth. No dividing walls, no shut gates. Just this light-filled, unified existence of God and his people. God's people will reflect his glory and see his glory forever. So how do we live in light of our future here in this city? About 5 years ago, Len and I went to Disneyland with our daughter and her family, and our grandson Jacob had just turned 5 at the time. He had had some sneaky little habits in the months leading up to going to Disneyland, which his parents were working to correct. So they used this trip to try to correct some of those. For example, you would put him to bed and then you'd be sitting downstairs an hour and a half later and you'd look up and you'd see him peeking at you from the stairwell. He had an annoying habit of trying to creep out of his room after he was told to stay in there and tiptoeing about the house. So they used his anticipation of going to Disneyland to try to fix some things. They created something they called Disney Bucks, and if he did something right, like stay in his bed after he was sent to bed, and did not come out and sneak down, he would earn a Disney buck. If he did come out, he would lose one. And then when he got to Disneyland, he would be able to exchange these Disney bucks for actual money, and he would be able to buy something that he wanted. And he actually did pretty well. He managed to really work on some things he'd been doing, and he acquired quite a few Disney bucks that he had before we went to Disneyland. And he informed me that he was going to buy something really wonderful when he got there. And he said, Nana, it's going to be expensive. He was changing his current behavior in anticipation of where he was going. Now, wouldn't it be great if that happened for us? If we began to reflect the glory of God in small ways here and now in anticipation of when his glorious light will shine right through us. Why not now? How can we reflect his glory here and now? How can we let our anticipation of what is coming change us today? That's a good question for us to think about. Okay, moving into chapter 22, the angel shows John the river of the water of life, clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and running down the great street of the city. On either side of the river grows the tree of life. Now, the wording of that seemed to offer two options. One is that there are multiple trees, all of them the tree of life, growing on either side of the river. And the other is that there is one tree of life that is growing like a big complex system, but all off of one tree. And the reason for that second option is that in the Garden of Eden, there just seems to have been only one tree of life, not multiple. It was as if it was a special tree of which there was only one in existence. And that would make it likely that there is perhaps only one in heaven. Now, olive trees can do this. They can send up shoots from the far ends of their root systems. In most trees, when that happens, the sucker that comes up from the roots is not fruitful. But in olive trees, they are fruitful. The growth from the ends of the roots can actually become trunks and trees that produce olives. So you might see an olive tree and then with a circle of other olive trees all around it, and it's actually all one root system, really all one tree. So perhaps that's what's happening here. This tree of life produces 12 crops of fruit every year. It's lavishly fruitful, providing abundantly. And it says that the leaves are for the healing of the nations. Now this brings up more questions, doesn't it? Why do the nations need healing? This is the eternal state. So from what do we need healing? Who needs healing? Actually, it seems that this phrase is meant to impress upon us that healing is all that there is in this city. It's not saying that we're going to need healing from new wounds, but that healing is the condition of the New Jerusalem, permanent and total and ongoing healing. The next phrase seems to emphasize the same thing. Neither will there be any more curse. The rest of verse 3 down through verse 5 repeat images we have seen before. The throne of God and of the Lamb is here. The servants of God serve him and see his face. His name is on their foreheads. There will be no night. There's no need for lamps or the sun, for God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever. Chapter 21 seems to use the image of the city to tie back to Jerusalem, where God dwelt among his people, and to the temple, where his presence was in the most holy place. But this city is better than both the original Jerusalem and the tabernacle. The community with God and with his people is being emphasized. But the first 5 verses of chapter 22 seem to take us back to the image of the Garden of Eden, with its abundant provision of life and its perfect lush beauty and its abundant water. But this new Jerusalem is better than the Garden of Eden as well. It is the culmination of all of God's plans and is better than anything God has ever given to people before. Everything else is just a pale shadow of what is still to come. The best is still ahead. We should live in anticipation of that coming city, letting that anticipation change how we live today. He is preparing us to live with him in this amazing place. He is preparing us to be this amazing city where he will live in us. Through us, he will radiate his glory to all the world. We should live fork in hand because the best is yet to come.